Yeah, Ambassador Reuven Azar, who's no stranger to the print, and who the print is no stranger to. Uh, Wonderful to welcome you here. He comes from a embattled country, but a perpetually embattled country. Right. That's a good description. Yeah. Keeps his smiles and takes all questions. So feel free to ask him anything, and he'll make a short opening statement, and I can tell you one thing. You can ask him what you want. Uh, an Israeli, the last thing an Israeli will do is an argument. Because if you go to a bar in Tel Aviv, it looks like there are about 50 brawls going on. On each table, there are about 3 brawls going on. But at the end of the day, they get it all together. So if there's one country that's even more argumentative than India, that's his country. And right now, I see many arguments raising there because because I not just subscribe to Harris. These are besides others. My condolence. $14.75 every month. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, you also read The Economist, so
Yes.
I might be suspicious of your masochism tendencies. Um, well, thank you very much for doing this. We are at a pretty consequential moment, I think, in the history of our region, because Israel, we've been usually democracies try to postpone wars. We've been seeing this build up around us that was promoted mainly by Qasem Soleimani, that was the architect of the war of proxies, these armies that were being built around us. We were concentrated for years in trying to postpone the moment in which Iran will acquire nuclear weapons. We were pretty successful at that because usually, if a country, especially a country as sophisticated like Iran, decides to build weapons with the technology that was already invented 80 years ago, it will take no more than 5 years to do it. But thanks to our efforts, it took them more than 30 years, and they didn't do it. But unfortunately, the regime was, developing other threats against Israel, existential threats, the ballistic missile threat that became very, very significant. Before the war, they were already, at the pace that they were producing about 300 of them per month. So we were going to witness a situation in which their existential threat against us would be completely, could quickly, it would be incapable of coping with. But yet, we kept postponing the war until this exploded on our faces on the 2nd of October. And we did that because, the policy of the Prime Minister, and also the tendency of many politicians, is to concentrate at building the economy of the country. At the end of the day, if you don't have a strong economy, you won't have a strong military. It's going to be very difficult to defend ourselves. And we learned the lessons 50 years ago when we were surprised in 1973. Israel had a strong army, but we had a very weak economy. We ended up this war with about 40% of our GDP dedicated to security, with a diplomatic crisis. Many countries disconnecting relations with us. So we knew.
And shekel dropping zeros after that.
Yes.
Series of.
This time, we unfortunately, as a result of this effort to build the economy, our economy is quite strong. But we failed on the 7th of October. We were surprised. It was an intelligence failure, a military failure. That from that moment, our strategy changed. And Israel basically started peeling off the proxies one after the other. Hamas, PIJ, Hezbollah, and then the Assad regime fell. And for the first time in 47 years, we could deal directly with the country that has been basically orchestrating all this effort against us, which is Iran. That until a year ago, they were completely immune from any possibility of Israel to directly hit them because they are very distant geographically. But that changed. And we did this operation back in June because
Last year.
yes, because we knew, we had the intelligence that Iran was actually sticking out to a nuclear arsenal. They were working on a device, on military, on a device in which they would allow them to put a nuclear weapon on a missile. So we decided to take action. Fortunately, the United States joined on the last day. And what happened now is that we saw that they are taking, as a result of our strike, instead of sort of seriously negotiating an outcome with the Americans, they decided to take all these capabilities, both on the nuclear and the ballistic, and to dig it so deep into a mountain that we won't be able to hit it in the future. And therefore, we felt obliged to take action. And this time, in the first time in the history of our region, we did a joint operation with the United States, which is quite rare. We didn't do it in the past. So when it comes to the results, I think that the immediate result is that we've been able to neutralize these two existential threats, at least for now. We hit hundreds of targets that are connected with the nuclear program. So the nuclear program has been taken aback at least for 3 to 5 years. And when it comes to the ballistic capability, it was degraded, especially the production capability. But still, they have residual, possibility of firing back at us. Now, he also said, as a result of the fact that we don't want to be in constant wars every 3 to 5 years, that we would make an effort to try to debilitate the regime to the extent that the Iranian people would have the possibility to embrace their future. Because we cannot, and we don't have the aspiration nor the capability of determining who is going to rule Iran. But we felt very strongly that the Iranian people oppose this regime. And, there are several examples why that is correct. The fact that internet is not working in Iran since the beginning of March, the fact that they had to invite 4 militias into the country, including the Hash al-Shabi from Iraq, the Fatimiyun from Pakistan, etc., from Afghanistan. The cracks that you are seeing in the system when the IRGC are basically calling the shots and doing, I think, many.
What was the group from Pakistan? I thought was that was the Judullah.
I think it was the Fatimiyun, I'm not sure.
Fatimiyun.
I didn't go there to check, but maybe somebody will give us the information. But
Because there's a bunch of groups in the Baluch areas on both sides. Jaish-e-Adl that the Iranians attacked. And then there's a Jalula, but Fatimiyun, I didn't hear about.
But the important thing is that we feel that the situation changed, and the RGC are calling the shots, and they did mistakes. The first mistake I think they did is to attack targets in the Gulf, despite the fact that Pezeshkian, the president, said they won't do it, and they targeted civilian infrastructure and civilian targets that had nothing to do with infrastructure. And that, I think, is going to have repercussions for the future when it comes to the future relations in the Gulf. And the other mistake is that they decided to use this Hormuz card, which not only punishes their so-called friends, like you, but they also boomerang at them, because at the end of the day, the Americans came with a naval blockade. And this is a card that you can use once, because after you use it, not only that there's retribution, but countries are going to draw the conclusions. We have seen in the past the countries in the Gulf building infrastructure to circumvent Hormuz, but now it's going to happen much more forcefully. So we hope, we don't know whether this regime will change its policy or there will be a regime change or not. We took action because we had an immediate existential threat, and this is the consensus in Israel. We hope that this will not only end by that, we hope that there would be a political outcome. But it remains to be seen. Right now, it seems that the dynamic, despite all the disinformation campaigns, the so-called narrative of Iranian victory, I think that the Americans hold quite strong leverage, especially on the economic side. They had the military capability to strike again. The Iranian air defenses are completely helpless for that. So I hope that things can conclude diplomatically. I'm not sure. I'm not very optimistic, given the policy of especially the IRGC. But we'll see. So I'll stop here and
Somebody want to ask a question? Somebody wants to start this?
Who would be the first courageous person?
Okay, let me ask you. Let me start with Israel. There is also a robust debate within Israel. And now we have two big leaders joining hands, setting up a coalition against Netanyahu in October election. Uh, how is the war playing out in your politics right now? Who's on which side?
It's an interesting question because despite the fact that we're in an election year, there is no argument regarding the need for the operation to be conducted.
But what are the two rivals?
The argument
Of our generals.
Well, again, no. Right now, we have several contestants in the political land. You have the leading party in the polls at this point is the combination after the union that was announced a few days back between Bennett and Lapid.
Right.
So the leader of the opposition, who's not a general, he comes from a journalistic background.
Yeah. He was an TV anchor.
Yes. Has joined hands with Naftali Bennett, who is not a general either. He was in the commandos, but he's an entrepreneur. And they are not arguing the justification of the war. What they are attacking the prime minister is for, in their view, for failing to bring a political outcome that will translate the military achievements into a diplomatic outcome that will bring stability for Front. So the war is not over. This has been the longest war in the history. So there are some criticisms about that as well. And no doubt that the outcome of the war are going to be part of the political campaign. And as we are going to see in the next few months, we are going to see, there's not a date yet, but it's within the next 6 months. We're going to have elections, probably in October.
Because the system is a bit complicated, Israel has a proportional representation system, and there are some twists within that. You have to have a minimum number of votes. So usually the party that leads the coalition doesn't have 30, 32 more than that to receive, right? But 35% or 25% of the seats. The Knesset is 120 members, and then others join in, and very often hard right and hard left and the Arab parties also join the same coalition.
We have a Muslim Brotherhood party.
So, Muslim Brotherhood Party, on the Jewish side, they also have parties which question the existence of Israel, right? They've sought the excuse for not enlisting in the army. Isn't it? Yeah, that's part of the debate. So it's a very interesting country. You should all read more about it. But questions now, please.
Hello, my name is Sahaj. I'm an intern here. So thank you very much for coming out to speak to us. You ended your statement by telling us of your skepticism of a diplomatic solution to the current sort of war with Iran. So as our friend Clausewitz tells us, all wars are fought to win a political objective. And once that's done, theoretically, you can give up and go home. On the other hand, a war with vaguely defined political objectives could go on for decades, as the US learned to their detriment in the Middle East. Are you afraid that Israel is in fact entering such a war, one that doesn't have a diplomatic solution and one whose objectives are vaguely defined and therefore never achievable?
It's a forever war.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have been in a forever war for the last 47 years since the Islamic Revolution, because Iran has been engaging unilaterally in a war against us that was most of the time a war by a proxy. Okay. Now, there have been military objectives. That's the removal of the two existential threats that I talked about. Now, the question is, to what extent do you remove it? Because if you don't have cooperation from the other side and you don't have the capability to invade the country, yes, so there's a danger that the fissile material that stays there at the end of the day can be used again to try to re-embark in a military nuclear program. So we still have that challenge. We haven't solved that. But what we have done militarily is that we have removed the immediate threat that we have. Now, politically, it remains to be seen. I think that it's very difficult to have negotiations with a country that has an ideology of annihilation of the other side. Okay, we have been in these situations in the past, and following the Arab-Israeli conflict, which its peak has been, the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago, eventually we have reached peace because we had a party on the other side that was engaged in trying to actually negotiate something with us. So peace was achievable. Here, we are not talking about the possibility of peace with this regime because they are not recognizing us. They don't want to talk to us. So it's either you get relief until the next time you have to tackle the threat, or that you have a change in the policy or the change of the regime. And that's now too early to call. We didn't have as an objective at the outset of the war a regime change. What we said is that we hope that there will be a change of the regime or in the regime as a result of the internal action in Iran of their Iranian citizens, but we cannot assure that will happen. So to a certain extent, your question is relevant. We don't have, at this point, a diplomatic solution in the horizon, and it's basically the ability of to leverage the cards that we have, that the Americans have at this point, whether these cards will be played in a smart way to create a situation in which eventually there is also a diplomatic achievement.
Thank you, Ambassador. Keshav here. I cover diplomacy and foreign affairs for ThePrint. I have two questions, but my first one is with regards to the thrust in the IDF. And the reason I asked this question is this case in Lebanon of the desecration of the statue a couple of weeks ago of Jesus, which I know that the Israeli government has come out and said we are investigating into this. But my question is, this is not the first sort of instance.
Also some cases of looting.
Looting, yes. The Haaretz
that the commander has said that you brought disrepute to IDF.
Yes, so the Haaretz has reported cases of looting as an exclusive recently. And then since 7th of October, there have been media reports regarding, the IDF's actions. Now, my question to you is, how do you sort of deal with the trust in the Israeli army globally as being one that is the most humane or moral army when we have more and more of these cases coming out? So it's a question of trust in the IDF here, right?
Look, it's the classical man by dog kind of, there's a lot of hypocrisy here because these incidents are very rare. And when they are so-called celebrated in a way that they are completely blown out of proportion. At the end of the day, everybody knows that, what is Israel's attitude towards Christian communities, what has been our relationship with the Christians in the South for years, how we have shielded them, how they've been working in Israel in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And this is an exception. And when you have such an exception, there are condemnations up to the level of the Prime Minister of Israel. Okay? So, of course, that news have to report news, but the question is to what extent this represents, and it's a trend. It's not a trend. It's something that is very negative, and we have to deal with. And we have the means to, prosecute people in the armed forces that are taking illegal action. So we will do that.
And you will do that.
Of course.
Sorry. The second question I mentioned is on West Bank. And the reason I'm asking is that we've seen a lot of reports, credible reports of violence, settler violence. And the settler project is internationally recognized by the UN as illegal. There have been calls, including from India, on, following relevant international law when it comes to settlers in West Bank. How do you really, what is the view of Israel when it comes to settlements in West Bank? That has been condemned, I think, also by the EU recently and, multiple countries. So that's a burning international law question as well. So,
yeah, look, we have indigenous countries, we have indigenous rights in the land of Israel. And these indigenous rights are according to customary law. Now, we have tried time and again to reach a political settlement with the Palestinians. And at instances, 2000, 2007, several times, 2008, we had proposals on the table to relinquish control from large parts of the West Bank, despite the fact that we have indigenous rights there, including in parts of Jerusalem. Unfortunately, this has been interpreted by people like Arafat and others as a sign of weakness. There was the famous speech of Nasrallah about how Israel attachment to the land is no stronger than spider web that can be removed. They interpreted our attempt to make peace with them as weakness. And therefore, what the government is doing now is exercising our rights when it comes to our indigenous legal rights in Judea and Samaria. Because our Palestinian neighbors have to understand that if they fail time and again to come to the table in good faith and negotiate peace with us, accepts our rights to have a nation state of our own as a Jewish people, instead of trying to destroy our state, then time is going to start working against them. We are not going to sit idly by and renounce our rights, our historic rights, that cannot be negated by any UN resolution. Because just to wait for them. They have to have the sense that if they don't negotiate with us, they will lose their rights. And then maybe we have a chance that they will come to the table to negotiate, because it will be in their interest to negotiate. Now, of course, that when there are people that are taking the law in their hands, this is something negative that we don't condone. On the contrary, we prosecute. And the government has the responsibility to have a monopoly on power. We don't accept vigilantism. Okay? However, we have to take into account that the communities in Judea and Samaria are the most attacked communities in the world. They are subject to violence all the time. But the only violence that is being recorded is the violence against Palestinians. This is not fair. So we have to create a situation that is conducive for peace. And we need people to understand that if they continue attacking us and refusing to come to the table in good faith to negotiate peace with us, they will have to suffer the consequences. And you are seeing it right now. We have created a buffer zone in the Gaza Strip until the 10-point plan of President Trump will be executed. That includes the dismantlement of Hamas. If Hamas doesn't renounce their weapons, we will continue keeping the buffer zone. We will continue maintaining our rights to defend ourselves and continue to pursue our rights to the indigenous land of Israel.
And this applies to Lebanon and southern Lebanon.
We don't have territorial claims in South Lebanon. This is the difference.
Yes.
Lebanon is a different case. In Lebanon, we have zero conflict with the Lebanese people. We have a problem with a sect in Lebanon that actually is a slave to an agenda that is dictated by Tehran. And they decided to use that platform of Lebanon to try to destroy the state of Israel. They built an arsenal of 150,000 rockets. They built an invading force of 15,000 commandos. They built tunnels underground, adjacent to the border with Israel. And we have reached a ceasefire. They broke the ceasefire again, and they attacked our communities, so we took a buffer zone. We engaged in peace negotiations with the Lebanese government, despite the fact that we know that at this point the Lebanese government doesn't have either the will or the capability to deal with Hezbollah. So it's going to be basically up to what happens in Tehran. If we manage to change the policy of Iran, a policy of aggression, a policy of trying to destroy the state of Israel, a policy that has been, sending to Hezbollah weapons and the means to produce them, then we have a chance to have stability in Lebanon. We'll see what happens.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you for being here. I'm Akshat. I'm an intern with ThePrint. So you mentioned The Economist. So a few months ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu was giving an interview to The Economist, and he mentioned how Israel was essentially fighting a civilizational war. And we are doing this on behalf of the Western civilization. Now, my question is, do you think there is consensus in the Western world regarding this, that Israel is doing it for all of us?
Well, look, we are defending ourselves. When it comes to war and peace, nobody's doing anybody a favor. But we do believe that defeating radicalism and terrorism is conducive for the interest not only of Israel, but also for the region, because the region has been suffering. You know, the Iranian regime was controlling 4 Arab capitals before the 7th of October. This is no longer the case. I think that
Which four?
Sana'a,
Yes.
Damascus, Baghdad, and Beirut. So they are still pretty strong, you know. In Iraq, for
Iraq,
example,
yes.
they are they are still calling the shots. So whoever is elected in Iraq probably will be a pro-Iranian regime prime minister.
In fact, they're calling the shots to the extent that they went and bombed parts of Iraq, Erbil,
Yeah.
to subdue the Kurds. And Iraqis did not complain.
Yeah. So the situation is pretty clear to everybody. And I think that this debilitation of the Iranian regime, look, this is going to have repercussions for the future, because I think that for the first time, Iran had to pay a price, had to be accountable, held accountable for their aggression. And this gives us an opening, a hope, because we know that the Iranian people have been distancing themselves from the ideology of the regime. You could see it in demonstrations that happened time and again. Unfortunately, the demonstrations were crushed in a very violent way. And it's pretty amazing to see how many countries that have been opposing this US Israeli operation haven't been doing much to defend the Iranian people from the cruelty. You know, they were, not only that, according to the reports, they killed more than 30,000 people, they were chasing them into hospitals and killing them in their beds and killing the nurses that were treating them. This is how cruel this regime is. And it's very difficult to revolt against it. I don't envy the Iranian people. But I think that at the end of the day, the price that Iran will pay as a result of this aggression may create some long-term trends that will change the future of Iran, and hopefully will change the future of the region for better.
Hi, sir. Devdatta from ThePrint. I cover diplomacy here. So, a follow up to your answer, because you recently like right now in your answer, you mentioned that during the economic protests in Iran, the regime was bombing hospitals, killing nurses. So, as a journalist, I'll ask you this question. This is not a political question, but Israel has been said to have killed the largest number of journalists in 2025 alone, and around 17,000 Palestinian civilians, which includes 976 toddlers. So, when you speak about, why it is important to bring about a regime change in Iran, which will then set a larger trend, like you said, for the geopolitical betterment and for the, why it is the reason that you say is yourself in your self-defense. My question then is, when civilians are killed, and you also mentioned how some people, according to you, some people take the law in their hands and then they are persecuted by the Israeli forces, and their justice is brought to them. On the question of accountability, then, I wanted to know if you have watched this film that recently came out, which is called The Voice of Hind Rajab, which is about this 6-year-old girl.
Yeah, I know the
Yeah.
story. Look, I understand the question.
There's just a minor
Yeah.
editorial correction. You mean prosecuted, not
Yes.
persecuted. Prosecuted.
I think I understand the question. Look,
Would you like
Yeah.
to answer that?
yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. It's a very important question. Look, people really have to understand the dynamics in the Gaza Strip to realize why the civilian toll has been so high, including of so-called journalists. Because what happened is that Hamas, throughout the 18 years they were in power in the Gaza Strip, have enslaved every civilian infrastructure in order to shield their military capability. There were 18 hospitals in the Gaza Strip. Under each and every one of the 18 hospitals, Hamas built their headquarters. In order to use the hospitals, they knew how Israel operates. They knew what is the Western code. They abused the Western code in order to create a situation in which Israel is incapable of defending itself. So we had to go to these places, like the most famous, the Shifa Hospital, and attack it from different angles in order to minimize the cost in human lives.
No, I understand that.
Now, one second. You asked a question, let me answer. So they had a so-called spokesperson, very famous one, called Abu Ubaidah, who was glorified in Al Jazeera and other places as a hero. He built an army of so-called journalists. And in all the military units of Hamas, there were 1,500 terrorists that went out with press vests. Many of them were actually employed by foreign correspondents, by foreign outlets like AP, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and many others. They were receiving salaries for being journalists while being terrorists. So they have perfected the abuse of every human code written in the book. And we had to deal with that. So we cannot be in a situation that as a result of this abuse, we won't be able to defend ourselves. And unfortunately, and they even said, Hania said it personally before we took him out. He said, we are ready to sacrifice 1 million Palestinians for the cause. They don't care about human lives. If Israel would have wanted to finish this war immediately, we could carpet bomb the Gaza Strip and have 0 casualties. We had the capability of doing so, but we didn't do so. In this war, after the 7th of October, which 1,200 people were massacred, 800 soldiers were killed because we are different than Hamas, because we try to minimize the damage. When you compare, and this was written not just by Israelis, but by military experts around the world, and they know that actually the toll in Gaza, when it comes to civilians versus terrorists, was lower than the toll in Mosul, for example. There it was 1 to 8. In Gaza, it was 1 to 1.5. So yes, there is a terrible cost in human lives. This is really something that we wanted to avoid. We were attacked on the 7th of October. We didn't launch a campaign just for the sake of, just for the sake of taking, territory. On the contrary, we withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005. So, democracies are going to be challenged by ideologies that want to bring not just Israel, they want to bring the West down. They want to bring the universal values down because they offer an alternative civilizational mindset that degrades the value of life. So by pinpointing and accusing Israel that is trying to do the utmost to lower civilian lives, you're actually, people are being cheated. And even the history of Hind Rajab, I don't have all the details, but this has been contested many times. And this story is not necessarily what happened. Again, we can go into the debate, I would have to check it, but at the end of the day, we know the pattern here. The pattern here is that we have barbaric forces, okay? And we have to fight against the barbaric forces, and they will do whatever they can in order to win the narrative war by projecting themselves, either as Salah ad-Din, the victors, or the victims. So if you see a rhetoric in which somebody is either a victor and a hero or a victim, I think you have to be suspicious and not take for granted any information that's being put forward. Yeah.
Is everybody familiar with Mosul, where Mosul is and what happened? Anybody seen the documentaries? Islamic State had taken over in Iraq, in northern Iraq. And then everybody got together, including the Iranians, to take them out of there. So that's a place where the Iranians and the Americans actually worked together.
Okay, Honorable Ambassador, when this conflict started, I initially had naturally sympathetic view towards Israel because it was unfair what happened to you, to your country. At the time, I was in the U.S. and my landlord was an Israeli American and very good friend of mine. And I have been a fan of Martin van Crevel's books on warfare, so I do have like broader respect for Israeli forces and how they try not to have extra casualties. But I was really surprised when we knew for years, if not decades, that most of the infrastructure of Hamas was underground. And we probably should have dealt with it in a way where we would have, instead of bombing, said that we will walk in and we will not hurt anyone and we will continue to provide humanitarian aid all the time unless we are shot upon. All we want is demolish this subterranean infrastructure. We do not want to hurt anyone, just what is under the ground. Please let us do that. And of course, they won't just let you do that. I understand that fact. And there would still be casualties, but at least that would have presented a very different image to the world.
Yeah, I think that you lack really sincerely knowledge about the tactics of the military dynamics there, because what happened, why people are seeing these pictures of wide devastations, which entire communities, entire buildings have been destroyed. What was happening is that the underground infrastructure was built under buildings. So each time that Israel would approach, Hamas would booby trap all the buildings, escape, and also do caches of weapons. And with the hope that when we go back, they will be able to, go back to the caches and attack us again. So the tactics there were tactics that actually left us no choice but to destroy building after building, okay, in order to create a situation in which we can tackle the underground infrastructure. And even after we've done that, even now, few months after the ceasefire, in which we control the buffer zone until the yellow line, we are still tackling underground facilities. We are talking here, we thought at the beginning that we are talking about 400 kilometers of tunnels. We were mistaken. It was at least double that, okay? So this is something that we are having to do. It's regrettable, that Hamas, instead of building the future Palestinian state, they decided that they want to invest all the aid that they are getting in order to create the infrastructure to launch an attack and destroy the Jewish state. But this is reality. You have to deal with reality. Reality is complex. I can tell you, I can share with you that many militaries from all around the world, including India, come to see what we've done because there are lessons from that to other parts of the world. Unfortunately, what I can tell you is that this kind of barbaric attack has been an inspiration for many terrorist organizations that are going to try to imitate what Hamas did. And so we have a common challenge here. I hope that you won't, in the future, have to tackle such a formidable task. But if you do, at least you would be able to learn the lessons that we drew during this war.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. I'm Janki. Two questions. One is, how do you see this war changing Israel's equations and ties with the rest of the Gulf countries? You mentioned that among the two mistakes that Iran made, one was firing at the Gulf countries. Do you think that's an opportunity for Israel to get some of its ties back in order, or improve the ties that it already has with the rest of the Gulf countries? And second, US has been saying, and we have on record statement, that the regime change has happened. It has already taken place. Does Israel also believe so?
Well, on the first one, we, I think, started a dynamic that was very interesting 5 years before Abraham Accords. I think that the first time in which we understood, and also many Gulf countries understood, that we are basically reading from the same page, was when the JCPOA was signed. Because the JCPOA was, in our eye, in our perspective, a huge threat on the region. It only would postpone the capability of Iran to have unlimited enriched uranium within 15, 20 years, and then they would be able to sneak out to a nuclear arsenal in matters of weeks, and we wouldn't be capable of stopping them. In addition, the JCPOA had the potential to remove sanctions to the degree that Iran would be so powerful that what we have seen now with their proxy armies and the ballistic missile and the hundreds of thousands of drones, that would be even more menacing. And therefore, at that point, we started a process of rapprochement with the Gulf countries that culminated in 2020 with the Abraham Accords. Now, I don't know what will happen following this war. It's a very good question. I think that we will continue and to intensify our defense coordination, our intelligence exchanges. We have it with most of the Gulf countries. I think we have a common interest to deal with this threat. But, you know, different countries have different considerations. We are not going to push for normalization. It has to be a part of a common interest. If there will be common interest, we will have more normalization. But we don't have to rush it. We are confident that we have enough common interest, and this is being proven every day in this war. And has been proven because after 2 years and a half, no country that had diplomatic relations with us cut their diplomatic relations. So I think that there is a potential there. And then you had a second question regarding regime change. Yeah. Look, there are all kinds of statements that you are seeing coming out. Some of the statements have a tactical purpose. Some of the statements, we don't necessarily understand always the background behind them. I'm not in a position to judge every statement that is coming out. At the end of the day, I think we have a common vision with our American friends. Our tactics will not always concur. Nobody is asking us, you know, what to do, how to utter themselves, but at the end of the day, the level of coordination is very strong. The phone calls are continuing on the day-to-day basis, and I'm sure that this is going to continue because I think we have a common interest in seeing a change in the conduct of this regime, and we will continue putting the leverage necessary in order to make that happen.
Just made you. So my name is Amritansh. You just said that the plan now. Oh, so my name is Amritansh. I'm part of the news desk here at ThePrint. You said just right now that the idea now is to look for common interests with the American allies. But over the last few weeks, we've seen, this was particularly during the time of the ceasefire, when initially it was announced, that Mr. Trump made some very disparaging statements where he publicly chastised the Israeli administration to the extent of, I'm quoting him, he said, "Enough is enough," in a Truth Social post. It's very difficult to keep track of those because he posts 100 of those every day. But how do you see, there is mixed signaling in terms of, are the Americans and the Israelis on the same page about the future direction that this conflict is going to take? Or for that matter of fact, what are the objectives? Because from the American side, since we have been following this since the very beginning, from the American side, the signaling as to what was the objective of the initial strikes, the goalpost has shifted more times than we can recount. I don't
think so. Look, we were very clear at the outset that we want to remove two existential threats. We are focused on that. We said that we want to give a chance to Iranian people to embrace their future, and this is exactly what we're doing. So there are changes in circumstances that have to do with the Iranian regime reaction, and therefore the Americans are doing things that they maybe didn't plan before. Maybe they did plan, but they didn't disclose it, like the naval blockade, for example. But at the end of the day, I think especially young people that do not have a very long memory of how diplomacy was conducted in the past, I expect them to adapt to the new circumstances. Diplomacy doesn't look the same way it looked when we were kids. Diplomacy is done now in social media. There are all kinds of statements that are happening, and you have to be very careful how you pick up whatever is out there. Because if you pick up everything and over-interpret the meaning of that, you can get very confused. So it's a bit tricky, Peter. You have to be smart enough to understand when a statement has to be taken seriously, when it has to be taken less seriously, what context we saw the statement, what is the video picture. So I trust you as a clearance journalist that we will be able to do that. And I think that all the signs are there. All the interest that we had, the American inspiration in achieving the war, which
Okay, so I'll end with my name is Ananya. I cover internal security for ThePrint. So I'll end with a question about Pakistan. How do you see Pakistan's role as a peacemaker, as a mediator in this? You've called them not so credible in your statement before.
And how central have they become to Middle East politics now, Middle East balance of power?
I think that you have all the reasons to be anxious about it. I can understand it. In the past, the United States also used take services of countries that we don't like Qatar, for example, that has a proven record of supporting radical extremism and even terrorism. But they used it in a way that was conducive to American interests and sometimes even to our interests, because thanks to the pressure they have put on them, we reached a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip that brought back all our hostages. And we have a very clear plan forward of what we're going to do. Now, when it comes to Pakistan, I already said what I think. I think that they have been a facilitator. The Americans have their reasons why they chose them. We are concentrating on the substance. We want to see a situation in which the 15-point plan put forward by President Trump will be implemented. And probably they will use the tools that they have that are usually much wider. The toolbox is much wider than the toolbox Israel has. So we trust the White House to do the right thing when it comes to the substance, and we have confidence in that process.
So how do you see this Saudi-Pakistan defense ties and the fact that now the Pakistani F-16s and military personnel are deployed in Saudi Arabia? So going forward to what she was asking, how do you see Pakistan's role in the Middle East affairs?
Well, it is not the first time that Pakistanis have been active in our region. Whoever has long memory can remember a time in 1970 in which Pakistani soldiers massacred
In Jordan.
Palestinians in Jordan.
Led by a brigadier called Ziaul Haq.
Yes. So this is not the first time. I don't think that is consequential in terms of determining the future of our region. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for finding time.